She moved through the halls of Alexandria like a bright comet cutting through the dark sky. Her mind was alight with numbers, shapes, and the grand dance of planets overhead. She taught boys and girls, rich and poor, how to measure circles and trace the orbits of stars. She asked big, brave questions. Why does the moon shine? What holds the heavens in place? Her words were soft, her voice calm, but every idea she spoke rang loud against the hush of fear. In a world still finding its spine for reason, she shone too bright. Hypatia was born in a city of scribes and scholars, a place where the great library once housed every scroll ever written. By the time she came of age, those scrolls were scattered or lost. But her father, Theon, a teacher himself, made sure she tasted their wisdom. He guided her through Euclid and Ptolemy, through geometry and astronomy. She learned to speak Greek as easily as children learn to breathe. Every morning, she stood before a small gathering under soaring columns, speaking with a soft smile. She showed them how to draw a perfect circle with only a compass and ruler. She held up a globe, pointed to Egypt's long river, and traced its path to the sea. She explained the motion of Mercury, closer to the sun, swift and secret. She spoke of spheres and cones like someone telling a story about old friends. Her students followed her words like leaves drifting on a gentle breeze. But the world around her was shifting. The old gods had faded. New faith took hold, and power reached for every crown it could find. In Alexandria, two figures struggled for control. Orestes, the Roman prefect who kept the peace, and Cyril, the bishop whose voice boomed from stone pulpits. They both needed the loyalty of the people. She had neither title nor staff, but she had something more dangerous: questions. Questions carry no blade, but they cut deeper than steel. She asked about truth, not the truth of a holy book or the truth of an emperor's law, but the truth of the stars. She asked, what makes truth true? She asked her students to think for themselves. She asked Orestes to stand firm when mobs threatened. She asked Cyril, in private, to calm his followers. These questions were small seeds, but the soil was dry with suspicion. Socrates Scholasticus wrote about that day in 415 AD when the sun still rose and set unaware of the violence about to unfold. He tells us a mob of Christians, stirred by Cyril's anger, dragged her from her chariot. They pulled her into a church, tore her clothes with iron claws, and skinned her alive. They ground her flesh into dust with broken tiles, crushed what remained, and burned her bones to ashes. All for speaking of moons and circles, for pressing on the magic of the mind. Damascius, a later philosopher, mourned her in words full of grief. He said she shone more brightly than the daylight, and that no one ever taught so many things so clearly. He painted her as a tragic hero, cut down in her prime. He claimed that her death cut the thread of knowledge passing in Alexandria. Without Hypatia, the lamp of learning flickered, then died. What was she teaching that scared them so much? She taught that reason stands on its own feet. She traced triangles and said they could point the way to heaven. She charted the stars and said they moved according to laws, not whims. She taught philosophy, that careful work of thought that dares to look at life and ask why. To those who held power through fear, that was witchcraft. Some say her murder was the end of ancient philosophy, that when they killed her, they sent a message. Thinking was no longer safe. And maybe they were right. After Hypatia, the light of free thought dimmed for centuries. Science crawled underground. Philosophy became something only whispered about. And women, they were pushed even further back into silence. The records don't say what she screamed, if she begged, if she stayed silent to the end. Maybe she did. Maybe her silence, even in death, was one last form of resistance. No one wrote down her last words. They just wrote down her fate. What's strange is how many people erased her after that. For a long time, she was just a footnote. Some called her a pagan. Others ignored her completely. The church rarely mentioned her. And when they did, it wasn't to praise. Her story was buried like the scrolls they burned. There are no letters from her own hand. No books bearing her name rest in dusty corners of modern shelves. All we know comes through others, through scribes who marveled at her or condemned her. We have fragments of her father's notes, We have commentaries by students. We have the tears of later philosophers. But her own voice is gone, like music carried away by wind. She was more than a teacher. She was a public thinker. She spoke at gatherings in the open air. She debated local leaders. She advised Orestes when an angry crowd surrounded his palace. She told him to stand firm on justice. He listened, and his survival owed something to her calm words. Then Cyril's anger rose, and the crowd turned on her instead. That day, people said they were saving the city from pagan plots. They claimed she told forbidden truths. But what were her questions really? Were they dangerous or just uncomfortable? She questioned blind faith. She questioned power that couldn't explain itself. She questioned men who ruled without reason. She wondered why math and stars made more sense than holy books. She asked if truth belonged to anyone, or if it lived somewhere beyond people's grasp, waiting to be discovered, not dictated. Her death was a warning. It said, "Think quietly, or death will hush you." It said, "Leave your questions at home, or you will pay." It said, "Truth belongs to the strongest sword." The mob crushed more than a body that day. It crushed a path to ask, to learn, to wonder. Alexandria, once bright with thought, began to darken. After her flesh was burned, the books went too. The library had fallen earlier, but small collections still remained. They faded after her death. No new scrolls took her place. Christian leaders deemed much of ancient learning suspect. Slowly, Egypt lost the art of geometry. Slowly, the sky became a mystery once more. There's something powerful in the fact that even today, we don't know all of her teachings. Some of her writings are lost, not by accident, but by design. That's how control works. You don't just kill a person, you kill their words, you burn the proof they ever lived. And yet, here we are, still saying her name. A few scribes dared to write her name in margins. A monk wrote of a woman who showed men the heavens. A poet whispered of the math girl who chased stars. The spark she lit in hearts refused to die. It jumped continents and centuries. It shone again when scholars in Baghdad copied Greek works. It glowed in Renaissance Italy when Venice traded for ancient scrolls. Maybe that's the real revenge, that a woman they tried to erase is now being read about centuries later, that her death wasn't the end of the conversation but the start of another one. After she died, Alexandria changed. It became quieter, not just literally, but intellectually. People stopped speaking so boldly. The library faded, the once loud marketplace of ideas became a whisper. And for centuries, that silence stretched. We call it the Dark Ages for a reason. But even then, somewhere in small corners, there were people keeping ideas alive, quietly passing on the spirit of Hypatia, not always in her name, but always in her voice. The voice of someone who believed the world made more sense when we looked at it honestly, even if honesty hurt. Sometimes I wonder what she would have thought of today, of how we speak, how we question, how we doubt. Would she feel proud, or would she see the same fear, just dressed differently? Because even now, we punish people for asking too loudly. We don't drag them through the streets, but we exile them in other ways. We cancel them. We silence them. We call them crazy, or extreme, or dangerous. We don't need roof tiles anymore. Words work just fine. And that's what makes her story so timeless. It's not just about a woman who died, it's about the price of thought, the risk of curiosity, the danger of speaking when you weren't invited to. Philosophy is the art of asking, of digging, of refusing to settle for easy answers. Hypatia lived that truth, not in a classroom, not in a book, but in the chaos of a real city, during a real time when real people hated what they couldn't control. Her life warns us, power hates doubt. It hates soft voices that ask out loud. It uses fear like a blade. But her life also teaches us, questions are seeds. They grow into trees of understanding. They give shade to weary souls. They point our eyes upward to the unknown. And as much as her life is a warning, it's also strangely a kind of hope. Because if her voice could last this long, maybe others can too. Maybe yours can. But know this, the world has never liked women who think too much, or men for that matter, or anyone, really, who pokes holes in the fabric of power. So if you go around asking questions, you'd better be ready for silence, for pushback, for doors to close. And if you keep asking anyway, then you might just be doing something right. They burned her alive for asking questions, but maybe they were the ones who should have been afraid.